Today, we are looking at the absolutely astronomical numbers fueling the current AI hype cycle. We're breaking down some deeply fascinating source material that asks a pretty uncomfortable question. Are we standing at the dawn of a massive new technological era? Or are we just staring down the barrel of the biggest financial bubble in human history? To really wrap our heads around the scale of this, we've got to start right here. As we speak, Silicon Valley is burning through $115 billion in cash. $115 billion. And the crazy part? This massive fortune is being spent based almost entirely on these wild hockey stick projections. You know the ones, charts where a flat line just suddenly shoots straight up into the stratosphere. But the terrifying catch here is that those projected profits, yeah, they might not actually exist yet. And honestly, that $115 billion, that's really just the buy-in. Remember when Sam Altman casually suggested that funding the true future of this industry might require a staggering $7 trillion? Just think about that number for a second. It's essentially the most massive, high-stakes poker game ever played. And the wildest part of the whole thing is that Wall Street didn't even blink. The players sitting at this table are just so rich and honestly so terrified of missing out that absolutely no one feels like they can afford to fold. Which brings us to this incredibly ominous warning from our source. We're currently in the inhale before the scream. I mean, what a chilling way to describe the market, right? Basically, if we just ignore the underlying math here, we're leaving ourselves completely exposed to that 1% outlier event. You know, that sudden snap where the illusion breaks and just takes everything down with it. Moving on to section 1, the math behind the miracle. So let's acknowledge the miracle first, right? Because we really need to contrast those awe-inspiring public numbers with the grim financial reality lurking underneath. 100 million. That's the number of users OpenAI reached in barely 60 days. It is literally the fastest growth trajectory in the history of human technology. No exaggeration. It's exactly the metric that convinced the entire world that the future had basically arrived overnight. But we immediately have to counter all that hype with a seriously harsh reality check, because behind that miracle, it's kind of a financial dumpster fire. Look at 2024. OpenAI generated a very impressive $3.7 billion in revenue, but they suffered a staggering $5 billion in losses. And look, you don't need a finance degree to know that losing significantly more cash than you bring in is probably not the most sustainable foundation for a global revolution. And the deeper you dig into this, the weirder the math actually gets. See, because the product itself is just so incredibly computationally expensive, people are using the tech way more than anyone expected. Which sounds great, right? Except it means these companies are actively losing money on their most loyal customers. We're talking about the power users, actually paying for those $200 a month pro subscriptions. It's wild. So how does that happen? Well, it happens because their entire pricing strategy wasn't exactly based on thorough, hardened market research. It was essentially based on vibes. It's pure financial storytelling. As the source material points out, this is starting to look uncomfortably similar to Enron. Just counting chickens before they've even thought about hatching, all while crossing their fingers and hoping the computing costs magically drop before the capital completely dries up. Let's look at section 2, the GPU hoarding siege. Because here's the thing, you can't run advanced AI on just any old laptop. And that hardware bottleneck has created a totally new kind of gold rush. The real magic trick of this whole era is the GPU shortage. Nvidia's specialized computer chips have suddenly become more valuable than gold. Or oil, even. It's completely transformed the landscape and basically turned Nvidia's CEO into an absolute rock star of the semiconductor world. Right now, if you control the chips, you control the whole AI revolution. And the cost of admission is just brutal. Startups aren't just casually renting a chip here or there. They need hundreds of them to even compete. We're seeing companies spending upwards of $1.1 million per month just on the hardware to keep the lights on. They're hoarding these chips like doomsday preppers in what the source perfectly describes as a 30-year siege on capital. Now, to actually pay off this massive $7 trillion gamble, the industry needs to generate an estimated $2 trillion in annual revenue by 2030. Where are they right now? About $200 billion. So that is a massive 10x gap. And to bridge that gap, you need a growth trajectory drawn by someone who is extremely optimistic and maybe just a little bit disconnected from the reality of how everyday consumers actually spend their money. Which leads us to section 3, driven by Blackberry Fear. So here's the billion-dollar question. If the math is so incredibly bad and the costs are so punishingly high, why on earth do these massive tech giants just keep spending? Well, the answer is this incredibly powerful psychological driver known as Blackberry Fear. Think about Microsoft, Google, Amazon. They aren't pouring billions into this because they see a clear path to immediate clean profit. No, they are investing out of sheer, unadulterated terror. They're terrified of becoming a ghost of the past if they happen to miss the next iPhone moment. It's a corporate bloodbath driven entirely by panic. And that panic results in this unbelievable dynamic where these companies are essentially trying to patch the Titanic with $100 bills. They happen to have these massive cash reserves, and they're just throwing it all at the problem, desperately hoping the music doesn't stop before they can finally figure out how to make the math actually work out. Next up, Section 4, 2008 all over again. Because guys, we have seen this exact script play out before. The language changes, the technology changes, sure, but human behavior? The financial recklessness? It often looks exactly the same. Back in 2008, the financial plutonium was terrible subprime mortgages, right? But they were dressed up and wrapped in these shiny AAA labels. And today it's software that hallucinatingly tells users to, put glue on their pizza to keep the cheese from sliding off, yet somehow it's wrapped in a pristine, untouchable $1 trillion valuation. So, what actually pops a bubble like this? The source outlines a few very real-world events that could force everyone to stop pretending. It could be a massive copyright lawsuit that just completely paralyzes the entire data pipeline. Or maybe it's a highly anticipated model launch that completely and utterly fails to deliver. Or it could just be a sudden macroeconomic shift. Something like a spike in interest rates that forcefully shuts off the free money cash spigot for good. And make no mistake, when that tightening finally happens, when the rubber actually meets the road, the consequences are going to be historic. Just think back to the dot-com bust of 1999, where $5 trillion was just wiped out. When the market finally snaps back to reality, all those billions of dollars spent purely on hype and vibes, they're going to evaporate overnight. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Surviving the Inevitable Snap. As we wrap up this explainer today, let's take a beat and focus on what history actually teaches us about surviving this kind of economic fallout. Because while the bubble is undoubtedly dangerous, being prepared is absolutely your best defense. Just keep this historical lesson in the back of your mind. Gold is money, and everything else is just credit. Seriously, when the music finally stops, empty promises and wild projections mean absolutely nothing. Tangible value is the only thing that remains. You really don't want to be the sad sack left holding a bag of empty promises when the broader market finally demands to see real value.
So the key takeaway for us here is that we have to fundamentally change how we evaluate these technologies. We have to stop chasing the shiny rocks of hype, stop investing your time or your capital based purely on vibes. Instead, demand the cold, hard precision of Ledger A. You need to look for actual, undeniable mathematical profit. Because at the end of the day, the math rarely lies, even when the people making the pitches do. So I'm going to leave you with this to chew on the next time you're watching the news and see the next big AI announcement roll across the screen. With everything we've just uncovered today, will you spot the house of cards before it falls?